One last time for 2025, or at least the 24-25, we welcome you back to the Frozen Edge podcast here as I'm joined by former NHL senior manager of hockey analytics, Timo Seppa. I'm Casey Ditzel. Timo, the Oilers could not drag out Game 7, and the season comes to a close with Florida defending now back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, and the conversation of dynasty can begin for the rest of the offseason until we see them back in action. An unbelievable performance, and it's all over here.
Yeah, it was awesome. And hey, I'm rocking my my multicolor Florida shirt from the All-Star festivities a couple years ago that a friend of mine picked up for me. But yes, second time I'm rocking this multicolored beauty here. Yeah, it's a mini dynasty at least. Yeah, make the final and then win two in a row. I mean, it's better that way than Tampa with winning two and then you're kind of fading off by losing one on the back end. Florida, is this a team that could come back next year and win it again? Sure, they could. I I think I'd like to focus on this season though, because we have seen, depending on how far back your hockey memory goes, we have seen some elite teams win the Stanley Cup. One that I remember really well that was a one-season wonder was the Rangers in 1994. That was a juggernaut. They almost lost to the Devils in the Eastern Conference Finals, but that was a team that was like this. They were a worthy Stanley Cup champion that just had everything going for them. And this is a Florida team. I know that it's very normal for coaches, general managers to look at what did the team do that won the Stanley Cup. You saw this with LA and you saw this with St. Louis. Oh, these are big bruising teams. They're heavy teams. They forecheck, whatever. That's the formula that we're going to copy, for the next season. This is a Florida team that is worth copying just with the way they play in all their zones efficiently. They forecheck, but yeah, think about all those odd man and breakaway goals that they had, capitalized on the power play. And just think about, we talked about how Bennett and Marchand were anticipating and were on their toes and Edmonton wasn't. And you saw other players, Reinhart, jump into that mix in this last game and anticipate and just outwill Edmonton. And so, long-winded answer here, but this was a tremendous Florida team. I think it's a mini dynasty in the making, maybe a big dynasty in the making, but just focusing on this one postseason, a tremendous postseason. Every Stanley Cup champion will have something to be proud of. This really is a team that is worthy to have their blueprint copied.
Well, the last time you wore your Florida All-Star jersey was right around the time Florida was battling with Toronto. Ironically, the Maple Leafs were the toughest contestant, taking Florida to 7, and really the only team that seemed like they gave them a chance. A lot of the media felt Carolina should be embarrassed. Now, maybe that looks a little bit less, as Edmonton was handled pretty cleanly in 6, and both of those teams well deserving being there in the Cup. How about Sam Reinhart? 4 goals to finish off the Stanley Cup final here, the back-to-back wins. And you mentioned Florida maybe being back. Their core is locked up long-term. All 4 of Alexander Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Reinhart, and Carter Verhaeghe are signed long-term through 2031. A scary thought for anybody who's going to be living in the Atlantic.
Yeah, not every single one of the star players there, but that's a lot to work with. Obviously, you'll have Marchand going to the highest bidder and Bennett and whatnot, but they will, as teams do. You're not going to be 100% the same team from one year to another. They will find some other pieces. Florida may not be exactly what they were this year. It'd be hard to be exactly what they were this postseason, but they will be a tough out at the very least next year.
And I should add in on the defensive core, don't forget about newly added asset Seth Jones,
Mm.
also in there as well as Gustav Forsling. Both of them are 2031 UFAs coming down the line. Conn Smythe goes to Sam Bennett. We thought about that going into game two. He was about 30-1 at that point, and it quickly shot up the charts 15 goals, 7 assists. Conn Smythe victory on 22 points. And it was 13 or 14 of those goals coming on the road. I think 13, a new playoff record as he passes Mark Scheifele on that mark. He was a driving force, and you think especially in the key games, getting game one on the road to settle them down there. Excuse me, it was game two after Draisaitl took force of game one in that back-to-back overtime session. But game two on the road to get them back home at 1-1, and then game five, he was a real driving factor along with Brad Marchand there. What impressed you the most about Sam Bennett's play?
Scoring a lot of goals. I mean, he's up the all-time chart of all-time goals in a single postseason. No, like I said, like with Marchand, he was anticipating. He was on his toes. He brought his A game for certainly the throughout the playoffs, but through this final stretch where they needed him. Yeah, he was tremendous, and I hope somebody took our advice when he was 30-1 and cashed in a nice ticket there on the Conn Smythe win there.
I want to go to the Oilers side now, and as they look forward, what do you see in the future? Some big contracts coming up. They've already
Mm.
re-signed Leon Draisaitl. That was the big news going into this year. That contract will kick in starting next season. They also now have the fringe of Connor McDavid and Evan Bouchard coming up. Both are not going to be cheap players to retain, you would think. And that was the brunt of the offense this offseason. They didn't have that depth scoring for a lot of it. And when that dried up, that really became the problem. You look last night, all of those guys, 0 points.
Yeah, yeah. Certainly, one of the points that I talked about in the series preview was the fact that Florida had so much more depth scoring, so much more depth quality throughout their lines, and I wasn't sure if that was quite the right read after game one because some of Edmonton's depth did look solid in game one, but throughout the bulk of the series, it was Florida. I imagine that they come back with Bouchard. I think overall you have the same question that's been dogging Edmonton for probably 10 years is getting some quality goaltending and getting some quality defense. And I understand like a big part of having modern defensemen, modern elite defensemen means that you have an elite offensive defenseman, and Bouchard is that, at least now. I don't know if that he'll continue to be that throughout his career. They need some defensemen that don't make mistakes, that are on their toes, that can think the game. And I do think they need to shuffle the cards there a little bit. I was very disappointed with that Colm and a lot of mistakes. A lot of bad reads, being beat on a lot of these big goals. That's just one player, but obviously, I just think they need to improve their defense there. Obviously, when you talk about depth players are supposed to be relatively cheap. So that's a part of the lineup that a good GM can remake is improving their depth. Now, going back to several seasons ago when they decided to, for whatever reason, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense at the time, give Stuart Skinner a 3-year contract or whatever it was at fairly good money. That wasn't a good idea. and it didn't seem like a good idea then. It doesn't seem like a good idea now. They need to figure out the goaltending as well. So these are things that we know. Can Edmonton make it back to the final again? Yes. Can they make it back to the final 4 years in a row like the Buffalo Bills did in the early 90s? Yes, I'm sure they can. Can they lose 4 years in a row? Yes, probably they can too. So if they don't figure out some of these questions, maybe they will be doomed to repeat this fate.
Well, you made it through that sentence without being kicked off the Zoom call here. Last time it was the end of our episode. On the goaltending front, it looks like it's going to be the same tandem returning unless they make some trades around.
Ay, ay, ay.
Cal Pickard locked in at 1 million for next year. Stu Skinner 2.6 million. So
No, is
going
yeah, is he off the big contract then? Okay.
They're both UFA in
Yeah.
26, 27. I want
Yeah.
to do a little bit of armchair GMing here as we
All right.
transition into looking towards next year. We'll start on the Edmonton side. I could very well see them being back here, and they keep the majority of their core together here. Ekholm is a UFA 26, 27. You haven't been as high on him, but I think that's a big piece of their defense. Evan Bouchard, RFA upcoming in this summer, so they'll have to negotiate his contract a little bit. But all the big dogs are in line. Next year is going to be a huge offseason with McDavid, Evander Kane, Arvidsson, Henrique, and some of those guys, Podkolzin and RFA, are all
Yeah.
coming up to the end of their
I
contract.
mean,
This year,
McDavid's the only one that matters. I mean,
true.
you could send the rest of those guys
And I think that's shown. This
Yeah.
year, the big ones, Corey Perry, Jeff Skinner, Connor Brown, Kapanen, Trent Frederick. So those are your depth pieces that you're talking about being potentially movable. And on the
I
defense, Klingberg.
I literally don't care about any one of those names that you mentioned other than Connor McDavid. I mean, I feel like you could like literally remake every single one of those other guys on the roster. Honestly,
You've
there's
got
not
Draisaitl locked in for 8.
yeah, there's not a single one of those other guys. You know, okay, if you want Bouchard, even want Ekholm, that's fine. There is not one other guy that you mentioned there that is important to me as far as I'm concerned.
Are you re-signing Corey Perry at 40 years old after everything he did to get them to this point? And what do you
Sure.
make out of
Yes, sure, why
the
not?
loss streak he's on? 5 of the last 6 years losing the Stanley Cup. You got to feel
Five
for
out of
him
the
a little
last
bit.
6 years making the Stanley Cup. He's a gamer. He's one of the few guys that I said, you know, again, like, okay, he gets beat on one of the Marchand goals. I mean, the dude's 40. But he's one of the few guys that was putting goals in net. I have a little bit of a soft spot for Arvidsson. I think he brings something interesting, but you know, could I do without an Evander Kane or whatever? Yes, I could always do without an Evander Kane. So, and the rest of the guys, they're all, you know, I understand that people, you know, might think that Trent Frederick brings some grit or this or that or whatever, but you know, I feel like with that depth of your lineup, part of what analytics is about is identifying guys that are out there that other team people don't realize are good. They're undervalued or they haven't popped yet or whatever. That's what analytics is all about, is finding those diamonds in the rough. And Edmonton should find a bunch of diamonds in the rough, and they should figure out something with the goaltending position.
All right, here's the Florida side, and this is where the big names come in. Brad Marchand, UFA, Thomas Nosek, Sam Bennett, the Conn Smythe winner, UFA, our guy Nico Sturm. On the defense core, they've got Nate Schmidt and Aaron Ekblad, and an RFA in Mackie Samoskevich to look for. Probably a bright future there. If you're Florida, who are you trying to keep? Who are you okay seeing go out the door as they try to continue to stay this just dominant force they've been?
So, thinking about what the GM on the other side did, Stan Bowman, when he was head of Chicago, I thought the first 2 times that they won the Stanley Cup, I think they made the exact right choices on keeping all of the core guys with Taves and Kane and Duncan Keith, and a couple other guys. And all of these other guys that were their, really nice third line contributors, or, fourth or fifth defenseman or whatever, they said, thanks, go pick up your paycheck somewhere else. Florida's got to do that with some of these guys. Is it Marchand? Is it Bennett? Obviously, Bennett is a big piece, but it all depends on what the calculations are. Would I like to keep, somebody in that mix? I'm not sure about Ekblad. Who's the other defenseman you mentioned?
Nate Schmidt.
Nate Schmidt. I thought Nate Schmidt was tremendous in these playoffs. I mean, so based on these playoffs, Nate Schmidt is one that if the number is not exorbitant, that's one that just strikes me as somebody I'd like to keep. But, you want to keep somebody, but I think the point, championship teams, if you want to turn into a dynasty, you cannot get too in love with every single player that you have. You have to let some of the guys go and let somebody else overpay them.
We will see what each of those sides do. It's not unreasonable to see this being a matchup for a third straight year. As you look at the roster breakdowns, both these teams have an opportunity to bring a significant chunk of these dominant cores back. Now we look to next year, Timo.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to talk about before we get in and close off our show here with our Stanley Cup way too early 2026 predictions?
All right. Can we think of one or two off the wall questions to throw each other off? I got one for you. So if you got your thinking cap on, you are probably thinking Western New York, where certainly both of us have done part or all of our growing up. So my question is, Buffalo Sabres, playoffs or not next year?
I do not think so. I don't see any way they get through this Atlantic division. And I think that in the, as it's been called by Spit and Chicklets over and over, the triangle there with Ottawa, Montreal that just got in. I expect New Jersey to be a big bounce back candidate this year. That's my team I see progressing a lot. I think we're going to see a lot of regression out of Montreal. I don't think Buffalo is anywhere close, and I'm quickly looking at their roster. They don't have any UFAs this year except for James Reimer. So they are outside of their RFAs going to have to make some big decisions. JJ Paterka is an RFA, Jack Quinn, Ryan McLeod, and Bernard Docker with Bo Byram on the back end. Man, I don't see Buffalo making the playoffs in the next 4 years, honestly.
Okay, so here's my bonus follow-up question that I just came up with. Clarkson grad, Jarmo Kekalainen, who was named senior advisor for Buffalo. Jarmo Kekalainen will be GM of the Buffalo Sabres in what year?
I mean, if I'm going on personal opinion, I think Buffalo needs a serious change, and I would be doing it as soon as next year if they don't get results. And I would say that comes on Kevin Adams. I'm surprised that he's still in the seat he is. And to be fair, has not had much help surrounding him in his transition to general manager. I can see this move kind of being the transition. I think if they don't make a big step, and I don't see that happening this year, I could see Kekalainen getting that spot, or at least that spot opening as soon as maybe March or late spring next year, because I think this team is so far away still, unfortunately. And I'll ride that on my question to go the same way. What teams do you see next year being kind of your big surprises as we look to the offseason going into next year? And obviously, this is very early. A lot of this is going to depend on what happens with the draft and what happens with July 1st. But what teams are you most excited about going into 25-26?
Well, as a former Arizona Coyotes supporter, I definitely am interested to see what kind of step Utah takes next year. Took a another maybe not a baby step, but a toddler step forward this past season. Are they quite ready for prime time with making the inching into the playoffs? I don't know. Certainly, I mean that's a team that interests me to see what they do. Um, I don't know who else pops into my mind. I'm certainly interested to see what kind of a train wreck or not the Rangers are next year. That's not really meaning that they are a pick or not for me, but that especially being in the greater New York City area, that certainly is a storyline that interests me.
All right, on to the Stanley Cup. Let's go east and let's go west. We'll each pick one long shot, way too early selection to win the 2026 Cup. How about we start in the Western Conference since the defending champs are in the East? Who do you see coming out of the West Coast and making a run at the Cup in 2026?
Wait, you said long shot. I thought we were just picking our picks. I'm not going to go with a long shot here.
Well, I,
I am
I would say that all of them are long shot, with the favorite being at plus 700.
Yeah. I'm a sucker for Colorado. I am. You'll frequently get me to pick Colorado in the preseason things. You'll frequently get me to pick them going deep in the playoff brackets or whatever. They had that mystery implosion in Game 7 in the first round. They for all intents and purposes were through, and then they imploded. That's a team that could have made some noise. I think they were worthy to be in the Western Conference Final. And I don't know who comes out of that. You put them against Edmonton in the Western Conference Final. I'm not sure who comes out of that. So they have got a lot of star power with Makar and McKinnon and lots of other names. So Colorado would be my pick in the West.
Last year, the Edmonton Oilers were my selection to win the Stanley Cup this year, and I'm going to stick with it going into this summer. I think Edmonton is primed to have an opportunity coming into July 1st to make some noise, and I'm excited to see what they do. I think Jeff Skinner was a bit of a disappointment on a big name signing. They went big game hunting after he got bought out in Buffalo.
Mm.
And I was particularly excited about that pick. I thought Skinner was going to be a difference maker to get him across the finish line. Instead, he was, for the most part, sitting in the press box. I'm going to take Edmonton again to come out of the West for a third straight time. Um, I didn't see anything throughout this run that would concern me that they're slowing down. Pretty much all the big names coming back. I think this is their one shot going into next year. I think next year is truly the cup or bust year for the Edmonton Oilers with this core group and potentially McDavid's contract lying in the balance, whether or not he's going to be a lifetime Oiler there. So for me, the pressure, the high stakes, I'm taking Edmonton out of the West. How about the East side? You've got the Florida swagger going with that all-star shirt. Who are you taking out of the East?
Realistically, Florida, but that's not a fun pick. So let's go with a bonus pick that's not Florida as well. Um, ticking down through the teams, I am not a believer or a fan of Carolina as some other people on this podcast are. It's Carolina's a team that I always pick to go deep into the playoffs, so I respect them. Um, I'll believe it when I see it. So, I mean, maybe it is next year. Um, don't know what to think about New Jersey. They took a step back. Wheels fell off of the Rangers. You can go on and on. Don't believe enough in Ottawa and whatever other teams you can throw at me. So, just for giggles, I am going to go with Toronto. I think Toronto would be a great story to be in the final. you know, hey, they took Florida to 7 games. I think some of that was a little bit with mirrors because even when Florida fell behind 2-0, we said, hey, underlying numbers, this and that, we don't believe in Toronto enough. And they do have some work to do on some of the um, some of the numbers that point towards possession or shot attempts or whatever. Of course, you don't win games on that, but they are indicators of things that Toronto needs to improve in their game. So, yeah, I would think that they say goodbye to a Mitch Marner or whatever, but this is the time for Toronto to remake their team. Now, do I trust Tree Living to do enough here? I don't know. Anyway, I can probably talk myself out of this pretty easily. Real pick is Florida. The fun pick is Toronto.
The 11th longest odds on the sheet, plus 2,400 to win the cup, are the Toronto Maple
So
Leafs. Florida
at
right up
those
there at the top,
at those
plus
odds, yes, I
750.
would take Toronto at those odds. Yes.
And again, we would not advise putting down money on the Stanley Cup until you see what happens at least on July 1st. Um, Toronto got a lot better on the defense core this year. They made some big moves. UFA Yanni Hakanpää is the only one on the D side. Some big names to fit on the offense. Max Pacioretty, John Tavares, Mitch Marner, specifically big time impending UFAs. For me, I'm exceptionally excited about Carolina. I also echo the sentiment. I think it's a replay of the Eastern Conference Final with Florida dominating the Atlantic. I got Carolina coming out of the Metro again. Carolina has a lot of moves upcoming here. And I think it's all for the good right now without any signings. They've got Burns and Orlov up at UFA, Roslovic, Robinson, and Jost. So I was looking through the line charts today. That leaves the top six just about intact. Svechnikov, Aho, Jarvis, Taylor Hall, Kokaniemi, Jackson Blake. The third line stays the same. Martinuk, Jordan Stahl, Stankoven, which I was a big time fan of. I think Bradley Nadeau gets a big shot and is going to fill in on the offense. That gives them a ton of cap space. They've got about 25 to 30 million available coming into this offseason to go big game hunting on that center that's been kind of the elusive missing spot, whether that's moving Kokaniemi down to a 4C role, buying him out, finding a trade. I think Kokaniemi needs to be out of that 2 center spot. I really like Matt Duchene if I'm in a general manager's position. But the D core to me is pretty set. Slavin and Sean Walker, Alexander Nikishin, Jalen Chatfield, and Shane Gostisbehere and Scott Morrow. Maybe you go out, add a right shot D to give Scott Morrow a little bit of time to develop. I think he was kind of the one piece this offseason that maybe looked like he was a little bit out of place when it came down to playing against Florida. But plenty of cap space to fill what in my mind is 2 spots on that roster. Carolina plus 700. They're the favorite somehow to
Wow.
win the Stanley Cup. I think that's a little bit crazy, but they are seated above Florida and Edmonton. For me, it's the cap space. I'm taking Carolina, a rematch of 2006 with Carolina and Edmonton. So now we shift to the Stanley Cup final. We'll give 2 scenarios. One, both of us could see the Edmonton Florida rematch. Who's winning if that is the case? And then for you, if it's your pick in Colorado versus Toronto. For me, if it ends up being that 2006 Edmonton Carolina rematch, who is your 2026 Stanley Cup champion?
I guess it's Florida again if it's Florida and Edmonton, especially if Edmonton hasn't upgraded their goaltending. If it is Colorado and Toronto, that is a Colorado win.
All right. I am going to go Edmonton Oilers. I'm
No.
doing it again. I'm gonna clip this and save it 1 year from now
Yeah.
when Connor McDavid gets that cup. I think regardless of who they play against, I think the Oilers are gonna get it done. Plus 750 on both of those picks between Florida and Edmonton. Colorado a little bit longer. Plus 850 Timo, and there we go. It's out there. Now we wait and see. We'll see how each team drafts, how each team picks in free agency, and a long summer ahead. It's been a real pleasure as we look back on some of the successes we've had. We hit a plus 4,700 parlay that, for anybody who followed along, probably paid for any of the missed picks. We had a couple plus 850 goal scorers, a few plus 2,000 to 3,000 parlays, and a lot of fun in between there, partner. I'm glad we made the decision to put this
Oh
together.
yeah.
You had to get dragged out of some early mornings, some late nights, me doing the same, and somehow it all worked out. We only missed one game in between there, between me being on the road, you surviving a successful surgery there,
Yeah.
and we've made it to the Stanley Cup final and a Stanley Cup champion.
Yeah, no, it has been awesome, and I thank you for suggesting this. As soon as you suggested it, I was all on board here. It has worked out well with the two of us, and it has been a lot of fun. And my knee is getting better. It's 4 weeks since my knee replacement, and I got into the swimming pool for the first time. You're allowed to do that 4 weeks out, so feeling a little bit more like a normal human being, and that is kind of like the first day of summer, getting into the swimming pool.
Watch out, Michael Phelps. Here comes Timo Seppa. What's the summer got in store? A long time until hockey is upcoming.
Probably a bunch of things that I don't necessarily need to mention, but we have a family vacation every year to the beach in Rhode Island. That's one highlight, and then all three of my daughters are in a local production of Shrek the Musical. About 12% of the cast will be Seppas.
Well, I hope you enjoy that, and hope you're a big Shrek fan going into the summer. That'll be a lot of fun to watch. Much different than the hockey scene, but a budding star on the radio podcast side, Timo. A bright future as you got your start here on the Frozen
That's
Edge.
right.
Don't forget
I
about
have you.
me
I have you to thank for it.
when
Yes,
you're making
absolutely.
it big time.
Yes.
All right. Well, that does it. That is it for the 2025 segment of the Frozen Edge podcast. We gave you our daily picks, props, and parlays, and none more for now to give up. A big thank you to everybody who liked, followed, and subscribed, and everybody who backed us on a lot of those picks and had fun watching, cheering, sometimes pulling out hair as the teams tried to follow in suit there. But Timo and I had a bunch of fun bringing each of those decisions and the stats to you, and maybe hopefully some things to think about going forward as you make those picks in the NHL betting market, a few statistical decisions to start to think about while making those bets. One last time for 2025. He's Timo Seppa. I'm Casey Ditzel. We had fun, but hope all of you do as well. Have a great summer, everybody.